circular economy. So again, thanks for joining us tonight for our event. It's Circular Economy, an Opportunity to Restart. So I'm really excited tonight to be joined by two of the founders of Bubusi. They're a startup in Victoria that's enabling the circular economy. And they're joining us all the way from W3 in Gippsland. So it's going to be Mark, who's an ecological economist, and Alejandra, who is a former teacher, but now a writer and a transdisciplinary researcher. Okay, so let's kind of jump right into it. I am going to share some slides. Let's go here. And share the screen, and you should see, there we go. Okay, so as I said, this is a Circular Economy in Victoria event. This is our 7th event in the past year, so we've been quite busy under the banner of the Circular Economy Club Melbourne. Circular Economy Club is a global network of circular economy clubs, and Circular Economy Victoria presents events under this banner. So we've had 7 events this year, and look forward to a lot more. Now let's go to next slide. So let me just talk a bit about Circular Economy Victoria before I jump right into it. So we're a not-for-profit again, and we're really we're dedicated to empowering every individual to see their skill set through a circular lens. And we believe the best way to aid transition in Victoria is by empowering individuals. And we do this through an engagement model, which we call AECEA, Awareness, Education, Collaboration, Empowerment, and Advocacy. So this event here is an awareness and education event. Now let's talk about really the topic tonight, COVID-19. So how do we turn this crisis into an opportunity to restart? I'd like kind of talk about what I'm hearing and what I'm reading about restarting. So I've read that the federal government and Angus Taylor are saying, well, what we should do is we should have a gas-led recovery, and it should be about hypergrowth. If you listen to the state government, Daniel Andrews is saying, well, the way we're going to restart is through infrastructure and construction, kind of a Keynesian approach to restarting the economy. And when I'm reflecting on restarting or the opportunity to restart, it really comes down to this wonderful walk that I had with my daughter the other day. She's 9 years old, and we walk the dog every evening to get some exercise. And she asked me this question. She said, Dad, when I'm your age, 35 years from now, what is the world going to be like? And so, so she's thinking, I'm kind of weird right now, but what's the world going to be like in 35 years? And, I didn't know how to answer that in terms of what it's definitely going to be like, but I could tell her what I hope it was going to be like. And so what I hope it's going to be like is an environmentally safe and socially just space in which humanity can thrive. And really that's meeting the needs of all within the means of the planet. And so to me, that's kind of the vision. That's the world I hope that she's living in 35 years. So how do we create this? How do we create a world that's environmentally safe within the means of the planet, but socially just, where we have more than enough for everyone, so abundance, whilst using less resources? And that really brings us to the topic, circular economy. And so most of you will be familiar with this butterfly diagram. On the right-hand side is your technical nutrients. And what we want to do is we want to, once we extract resources on the technical side, we want it to circulate through the economy as many times before it actually turns into waste. And that's how we create abundance. On the organic side, because it's renewable, what we want to do is not throw away those organic nutrients, but regenerate, so take them back into a renewable cycle. So circular economy right there. And I have the wonderful joy of working with Bubusi. I do some work with RMIT, and this is how I met Bubusi, Mark and Alejandra. Really, they're a startup and their tagline is creating abundance, so more than enough for everyone through sustainable sharing. And I thought it would be a really great way to start this conversation about reshaping our economy, or the opportunity restart, by highlighting an organization, a startup that is looking to enable this. So Mark, Alejandra, what I'll do is I will hand over to you. And welcome to Circular Economy Club.
Thank you very much, Ian. I'm Mark.
Yeah, I'm Alejandra. Hi, everyone. Good evening.
Well, we are going to start with our presentation. Let me just share the screen. And then we're going to go here. Okay, slideshow. Okay. Now, I hope you can all see the first slide. So as I was saying, thank you, Ian and Circular Economy Victoria, for hosting this wonderful event. We are really excited to be joining this so much needed discussion. So we're going to talk about Bubusi and the quest for balanced systems. From the atom to a galaxy and ultimately to the entire universe, systems are held together by the interaction between opposing forces that have learned to work in complementarity and thus attain balance. The Andean worldview calls this type of interaction yanantin, and they use textiles with a warp and weft as a metaphor. This need for balance between opposing forces is recognized in many cultures and traditions. For example, we find it in the symbol of the puquina from the ancient Peru, or in the taijitsu from the ancient China, or in the toltecayotl from ancient Mexico. The philosophies developed by these civilizations tend to express the interaction between these two forces in very similar ways. When the two are in opposition, nature brings balance through alternation and proportionality, by allowing one to dominate over the other and then the other way around for an equivalent amount of time. But the moment they learn to complement with each other, they evolve into something larger than the mere sum of their parts. This is how the warp and weft become the fabric of life, the fabric that holds everything together. As a result of that, opposition creates movement, while complementarity allows for evolution to take place. In a galaxy, these two principles express as follows. One force is centripetal. It is caused by the concentration of mass in the galactic center. If left unrestrained, the centripetal force would prompt stellar systems to spin faster and faster as they approach the galactic core, until the entire galaxy collapsed into a black hole. The other is centrifugal, which does exactly the opposite, push for the galaxy to expand. If left unimpeded, the orbital speed of the stellar bodies would increase with distance from the center, dispersing the entire galaxy. However, in a galaxy, celestial bodies maintain the same orbital speed regardless of their distance to the galactic core. This is, although one would expect the centripetal force to be dominant as a result of the larger concentration of mass at the center, in reality there is balance between the two, thus avoiding collapse. This is possible because there is a counterbalancing force equal in strength that holds the galaxy on its edges. Without it, there would be no warp, and therefore no fabric to allow for the evolution of life to take place. Our current economic system is like a galaxy, with a concentration of mass in the center. However, it differs from it because there is no counterbalancing force. Financial capital is like matter. It is also subject to gravitation. As a result of it, the larger the financial capital that is accumulated in the center, the strongest the ability to keep on accumulating more. This creates an unbalanced interplay of forces in which a centripetal force has become dominant, allowing for wealth to accumulate in less and less hands. This explains how in 2015, the richest 1% were already accumulating half of the global wealth, a proportion that keeps on increasing. Technology is responsible for accelerating this trend, but what makes this possible is something else. It is a type of entity called corporation, endowed with unlimited life, controlled not by society or its employees, but by the shareholders. This is by the owners of financial capital, designed to aim at profit maximization. No centrifugal force can balance such pull to the core, not the state, not the trade unions, not the consumer associations, even less the average Joe from Main Street. This centripetal force is responsible for creating our current systemic need for growth. The mechanics are very simple. The world population increases by an average of 1% a year. So it is reasonable to expect that to maintain wealth, we need to expand the economy by the same 1% a year. However, this is not what is really forcing the economy to grow as the only solution to avoid the misery of the many. It is the approximate 3% of wealth that on an annual basis is transferred from the 99% of the world population to the richest 1%, regardless of the growth, regardless even if the economy shrinks. As a result, the global economy has to expand by 4% a year just to maintain the wealth of the 99%. Since 1973, the economy has been expanding below this figure for most of the time. This means that with the exception of countries such as China or India that manage to maintain their growth rates above this 4% and take many out of poverty, the average Joe from the rest of the world has become poorer and poorer, while the wealthiest 1% has become richer and richer. Faced with this situation, the question remains, where is the centrifugal force? How can we balance this trend, which, if left unrestrained, would lead to the collapse of the entire economic system and of the society that depends on it?
And this is where Bubusi comes in. Thank you, Mark. I would like to talk about Bubusi now. We have conceived Bubusi as a tool to help create the required centrifugal force to help bring the economy back into balance. Our motto is creating abundance through sustainable sharing. This is, we are not aiming at making development sustainable because development is by definition unsustainable. We aim at sharing things sustainably. We are not trying to create abundance by having more of everything, because in a planet with limited resources, in which greed and hoarding has been turned into virtue, there is always going to be scarcity. We aim at creating abundance by having less things, but becoming wiser in the way we use them. The Wiradjuri people, one of the Australian First Nations, have a perfect understanding of this when they say, take what you need and know what you greed, and there will always be abundance for all forever. From the conceptual side, Bubusi proposes a series of transitions. The first of them is from ownership into custodianship. What does justify ownership? It is said that the tragedy of the common justifies it. When such tragedy takes place, it creates a situation in a shared resource system where individual users, acting independently according to their own self-interest, behave contrary to the common good of all users by depleting or spoiling the shared resources through their collective action. There are those who consider that the best way to avoid it is by making sure that everything has an owner, under the argument that the owner will take care of it. Ownership creates centripetal force. But what about the tragedy of the private? In the current legal system, being the owner of something gives us the right to deny it to others, even if we don't use it. Is this not a tragedy too? One that goes unaccounted? So, how can we overcome these tragedies? The Bubusi ecosystem aims at overcoming the two of them. The tragedy of the commons by turning the ecosystem rather than the product into the commons. This is possible because a commons can also be defined as the social practice for governing a resource by a community of users through the institution, rules, and traditions they create. And the tragedy of the private by turning the owner of the thing into its custodian. From the legal point of view, things can continue having an owner, but there is a social obligation to share them when they are not in use. This social obligation can only be expected when society in general and communities in particular can prove that specific products or items are better taken care of and utilized when shared with others than when privately owned. But how can this be achieved? Who are going to be the custodians? The custodians in our system are the libraries of things. Generally called tool libraries in Australia, a library of things aims at optimizing usage by sharing things within the community. They can loan a variety of objects such as tools, appliances, electronics, toys, and board games, craft supplies, musical instruments, and camping and recreational equipment. Bubusi aims at supporting a network of libraries of things established by community and charitable organizations, NGOs, city councils, and other not-for-profit entities. Bubusi is going to offer the software solution to prospective organizations to establish their own libraries of things and manage them sustainably. So the next transition is from deprivation to access. How do users access the item? We use reciprocity to make sure that sharing is sustainable. This means that access to an item generally involves an exchange that will cover the depreciation of the product or the item that is borrowed, the cost of administration, maintenance, and repair, and an insurance if it breaks. Another transition we aim for is from profit maximization into benefit optimization. And for this, we are talking about at the institutional level. The Bubusi ecosystem is a commons, and therefore there is no single organization that represents it. It is rather a loose network of stakeholders interacting with each other. What we offer is the software to run the network, and to champion it, we are in the process of registering 16+1, a limited company by guarantee with non-for-profit status to be incorporated in Australia. These type of entities should allow for benefit optimization and the channeling of resources rather than profit maximization and accumulation of resources. We have chosen Australia for setting up the foundation because it has a clear non-for-profit legislation and advantageous tax concessions for the not-for-profit sector in order to redirect resources toward projects and implementations. And the last of the transitions, we believe that's very important, is from employees and startup entrepreneurs into members of workers' cooperatives. In this sense, 16+1 will contract the services of different distributed cooperatives called DISCOs, created for organizing the talent that contributes to the development of the software and its implementations. The cooperatives will represent the software developers, UX designers, multimedia and web designers, and in general, any professional whose talent is required for building and implementing the software that runs the ecosystem. The first two DISCOs are to be established in Buenos Aires and Catalonia. Catalonia and Buenos Aires have been chosen as the destination for the first distributed cooperatives because of their tradition in cooperativism and the existence of an appropriate legal framework for these type of entities. They have also been chosen because 2/3 of our team reside in there, with the remaining 1/3 in Victoria. All in all, Bubusi is trying to operate at various levels. At a product level, sharing will increase the product usage along with its lifespan, which in turn will reduce the need for production. This is why we believe that a sharing ecosystem built on custodianship and access to things shall allow humanity to transition from a systemic need for growth into a state of dynamic balance. At an environmental level, the reduction in production plus the recycling or reuse into something else should help reduce the environmental footprint. This shall allow humanity to transition from a linear economy into a circular one. Additionally, entities not aiming at profit maximization but at benefit optimization, such as 16+1, and entities managed by their workers, such as the distributed cooperatives, shall contribute at an institutional level to transition from scarcity to abundance. The real abundance is enjoyed by people and communities as users in the ecosystem. This is how we aim at fostering a sharing ecosystem that creates abundance. Thank you very much for your attention, for joining us in the event. In a future presentation, we would like to explain how we apply fractal design to every dimension of the project.
And that's a section for questions.
Yeah, thanks. Great. Well, what we're going to do now is we're going to open up the chat. This is Ian here. Open up the chat for questions. So if you have any questions, please type it in the chat, and some of our conveners will get the questions to us. But before we start with those questions, I have a few that I prepared myself. Thanks so much for that presentation, Alejandra and Mark. I guess the first question we had is, what is the origin and meaning of Bubusi?
Well, 20 years ago, I was living in the Kiribati Islands, and there I learned about the concept of Bubusi, but they write it Bubuti, only that they pronounce the T-I as S. And I realized that, well, it was a good concept, and it was able to create a centrifugal force, because it allowed, when someone needed something, it just had to go to somebody else and ask for it. But it was not sustainable because it didn't ask for reciprocity. This is, someone can go and ask for something and to a relative or a neighbor, and that person cannot deny the thing. So there is no incentive to be entrepreneurial. So there is no centripetal force in the sense that we need balance. We don't want a lot of one or a lot of the other. And this is, as we were showing, what holds galaxies together. As well, this is what holds communities together. So we took the concept, we borrowed it, we changed the T for an S, which is a pronunciation that would be in English as Bubusi. And then we are using it for this concept of sustainable balance to create abundance.
Great. Excellent answer. Yeah, it's really about the balance, isn't it? Right. So you've laid it out in terms of the tragedy of commons and tragedy of the private, and how do you balance those two? I guess there's another question, and really this opportunity to restart. We're in hibernation right now here in Australia and globally in terms of the economy. But as we come out of it, you're providing a point of view around how we could reshape this economy and how we could restart. But I guess it's the governments really that would play a role in the economy. So when you think of the economy, there's government, markets, commons, and household. What role do you think the government should play in creating abundance whilst working within the means of the planet?
Well, we understand that the government should help create more of what we call the centrifugal force. That's what we really need at the moment. So in that sense, we expect the government to support initiatives related to cooperativism, the sharing economy, and sustainability. That could be done through policies and regulations that help increase diversity, promote natural resources, social resources, protect social resources and natural resources as well, and help redistribute wealth more equitably.
Yeah.
And we personally think that Victoria is taking good steps in that sense, because there is an example with taxes for people who are not using properties. So they are not encouraging in that way people buying properties as investment in real estate and not using them. So they have, I think, an owner surcharge, absentee surcharge, and vacant residential land tax, I think it is. Yeah. The other thing we really believe it's important for Australia, it's stronger action regarding waste disposal in landfills, or sending the waste overseas so other countries deal with the problem. And in this sense, Victoria has recently committed to an investment, a big one. I think it's $100 million dollars in improving the local recycling industry. So we really have hope for Victoria, and we think it's a great place to be having these kind of discussions.
Yeah, because really recycling Victoria as a policy, the circular economy policy, first step recycling, was announced before COVID-19, and this may be an opportunity to create those green jobs, if you will, to accelerate that transition, because now that we've hibernated, there may be an opportunity. So really, I guess that's the role I'd like to see government play is, you had a strategy, you've hibernated, maybe it's time to double down on that strategy instead of saying doubling down on construction or infrastructure, right? You speak about the concept of ownership and custodianship, right? So do you foresee any challenges in transitioning society? We're really tied to this tragedy of private, right? Ownership. I need to own it in order so I can use it anytime I want to. Really moving from that culture of ownership to a culture of custodianship. Do you see any challenges there? Yeah.
Well, of course, there are going to be challenges, but we had big challenges 350 years ago when we moved from a culture of custodianship to a culture of ownership. And everything started in England with the Enclosure Acts around 1650. And this is what triggered the Industrial Revolution, because of all the peasants that had to migrate to the cities, had no job. So they started being workers in the factories. And then is when the revolution started. Now, that was a big shift. Now, we are not saying that we need to go back to custodianship and remove ownership. We're just saying that there are two realities right now. We have the commons and we have ownership, and we have no intermediate. So there is no a buffer, point of balance in between the two that can avoid, in those cases that there is tragedy of the commons, because of course, the tragedy of the commons might happen in some cases, but it's not the norm. So in those cases that it happens, we can move into custodianship. And in those cases that there is tragedy of the private as well, we can move into custodianship. So this is very much as well, you were talking about the doughnut economics. And the doughnut is just, that torus, the doughnut in between. that sets the limits between kind of the environmental boundaries and the social needs. And this kind of case of intersection between the two. Well, in a way, we are defining this custodianship in a similar way, framing it in a similar way, so that we would like to create the ecosystem that allows for those that transition whenever is required and necessary to maintain that balance that we really need.
Yeah, and I guess now
he has something to say as well.
Oh, sorry, I just wanted to add on the, like, going a bit deeper, probably the main problem lies in between the concept of owning as opposite to belonging. And this is something that I would like to say that most indigenous and aboriginal people understand. In their own terms, we humans do not own the land and its resources, but we rather belong to the land. So this is the kind of understanding that makes buying and selling, these two concepts that really come from the idea of ownership, redundant. Well, belonging gives value to sharing. That's why we're also like supporting this idea of belonging, because it gives more value to sharing. And this being said, Bubusi is not really proposing to eradicate ownership. Because as Mark was explaining, we believe that transitions should follow their own rhythm and dynamics. And we're just proposing to bring into the equation the custodianship concept as a bridge between ownership and commons. So yeah, so that's really what
and I guess now we do have the technology to allow us to have that balance between ownership and custodianship, because before, the only way that I can be assured that I have access to this item, because I couldn't trace it when it was out of my sight, right, out of my view, was if I owned it and I knew where it was at all times, whether it's sitting on my shelf or not. Now, if I have traceability through technology and so on, which is what you're proposing, I don't need to own it, because I can get access to it because I have the traceability of where it is at any point in time. So I don't necessarily need to own it. I provide it to a custodian who then allows me to access it when I need to, right? So yeah, so I guess, as you said, we went from custodianship to ownership, but now we have the technology to allow us to come back and have that balance between the two. I guess the last question is on my side, and then we'll open up. There's a few questions that are flowing in. I guess the last question from my side is, when you have your traditional manufacturers and retailers, and in consumption economy, the consumer economy really drives a lot of the growth, right? From a consumer standpoint, that's why you have marketing. Buy more. Your life will be fulfilled if you have more in your house. You have a bigger house, you have a bigger car, blah blah blah. So should traditional manufacturers and retailers be concerned by the Bubusi model? And is there a way to bring these type of players in the market along the journey towards this balance between custodianship and ownership?
Yeah, we don't think traditional manufacturers and retailers should be concerned, because the centripetal force has already been taken. For example, a lot of the manufacturing from small and medium enterprises here in Australia, let's say during the 50s and the 60s, into overseas and relocated in China or in Vietnam or in other places. So and in those places, it's mostly managed by big corporations, which is part of that force that is relocating them there. So from that point of view, a manufacturer is going to see how the Bubusi model is in a way bringing back things locally, not just the Bubusi model, but all the ecosystem and the technology that goes along with it. In the future, for example, if we have open patent repositories on the internet and networks and ecosystem that allows, when something needs to be manufactured, let's say we need just a piece to to repair some component. And then someone has not far a 3D printer, and then they print that, and then they service that and get paid for that. So we're going to find how production, manufacturing, in a way, is coming back to a local level instead of being at that global level that is wasting a lot of resources and energy in moving things from one place to another. And by the way, it's not making us resilient. And we saw this with the coronavirus. Yeah. Like, for example, in Spain, there were all these masks coming from China. They were transiting in Turkey, and they took them, for example. And the same happened in other places. In which you have when there starts being this competition, and because things have all been centralized in a region of the planet and they have been manufactured there, then we are not resilient. So people started with CD printers producing many of the items that were required at hospitals and by people. Yeah. So these are the manufacturing level. But let's talk as well at the retail level. So what is happening at the retail level? We have the same concentration of power in a few firms. For example, we have in the United States that 50% of the online retail is in the hands of Amazon and 5% of the total retail. So, and that will keep on getting bigger because it's just the efficiency that we get through concentration. And that efficiency that we get through concentration, again, doesn't make us any resilient. What happens if one day the company just kind of goes bankrupt for whatever reason? It will be too big to fail as well. So we really need to go back into more kind of a local level. So perhaps Bubusi is not creating a lot of opportunities for retail. It's creating a lot of opportunities for the maintenance of the items. It's creating opportunities for the recycling, for the repair, for the reusing. So we're trying to do more with less. And this will require a lot of intelligence. This will require a network of individuals, organizations, for profit, not for profit, a combination, because the richness of the ecosystem will be in the combination of all these factors, so that there is these two forces in balance that are able to do that, and there will be jobs created through that system as well.
Yeah. So it's really a transition from one type of economy and the jobs in that economy to a new type of economy, just like your blacksmith who was making horseshoes, right? When the cars came in, well, you didn't have those anymore, but you had car manufacturing, and you had good jobs for a while, and in the Industrial Revolution, people making cars. And now what we're doing is shifting to another, where you decentralize again instead of being centralized. So new jobs, what people call the green jobs, right? So we need to see an acceleration to those green jobs, if you will, or those just jobs, if you will. Okay, I'm going to take a few questions. The first one is something probably on your mind, which is love the Library of Things idea. Just heard of it yesterday from a webinar, and now here on this event. Any info on similar things here in Australia, more specifically in Queensland?
Well, yes, there are around 5 libraries of things in Australia. Yeah. In Queensland, there is one in Brisbane. There are in Sydney, in Melbourne, in Perth, one that is starting in Canberra. But the real potential in Australia is not just that there are 5 libraries of things. There are 3,000 op shops. There are 250 toy libraries. Australia already has a huge culture for reusing, in a way, for buying secondhand things. And I come from Catalonia myself, and there is not so normal, because there's this Mediterranean idea that you need to make sure that whatever you have is new, etc. The Australian is a lot more pragmatic in that and says, no, if it's good and it's cheap, I buy it. So there is a lot here that very easily can be implemented and done. There are other aspects there that will be easier there. In cooperativism, for example, it would be easier there. So we are playing with the advantages of the different places in order to create an ecosystem that can thrive.
Yeah, and I guess really Bubusi is about networking, right? Those libraries, so the Brunswick Tool Library, for instance, or the Carleton Toy Library, for instance. It's really about networking those and getting them on the same, I guess, platform, if you will, so that there is sharing on a greater level, right? So if it's not within your local library, that perhaps you can find it in a library in the entire network. So I know you have plans really to start rolling out in the near future around enabling some of these libraries, right? So I guess the next question here is, let's see here. Yeah, so in the Bubusi ecosystem, Bubusi model, we have a question here from Shai. Said, thanks for the presentation. Wanted to ask who would contribute to the items to the library? How would the library be populated with items? Is there a business model to pay for the warehousing storage of the items?
Yes, well, there are two ways of contributing. One is donations, as op shops are already been contributed through donations. Another one, it can be I contribute with an item and in exchange I get a token. And with that token, I'm able to hire something else from the network. So that token is equivalent to, let's say, to the depreciation value of that item. Mm-hmm. And when I hire, like, let's say, something else, I borrow something else from a library and I have it for X amount of time, and there is an equivalent depreciation for that amount of time that slowly kind of depreciates the token until the token is fully depreciated. So in a way, what we did is to kind of replace that for something else. Now, and not have this, but be able to enjoy these other things, and even the same thing that I donated to the Library of Things. Now we can move one stage, let's say, beyond that, and we can say that the people themselves can offer things they have in their house, in the home, for being borrowed by other people, and they store them in their own place, in their own premises, but then they through the network they start lending it, and then they start borrowing other things in exchange. Yeah. So one thing that technology allows is, as you said, traceability. Another thing is trust. We can know that, okay, yes, this item works well and this person is reliable, so from the other side as well. And so that there is this knowledge of information that allows for this. It's just a matter of making sure that the information that we can, in a way, manage that information about us, and we can decide what we share, not just of items, but of information.
And this is where, I guess, from an economy standpoint, you could also be working with these traditional retailers and traditional manufacturers if they were given tax incentives instead of, once an item has been marked down, and they can't sell it, instead of putting it to landfill or send it to an op shop, if there's a proper tax incentives to possibly be populating a toy library, or a toy library if it's toy, a tool library if it's a tool, and so on, right? And then in terms of obsolescence, instead the current model of the hand drill, well, if something from 2 years ago, it now has nil value in the eyes of the manufacturer, but it will have quite a bit of value if it was in a library, right? Because you don't need to have the latest drill with the latest function. A drill is a drill is a drill, right? So that may be another way to really be populating. So again, it's about how do you bring, on a systemic level, how do you bring all the players of the economy to create incentives to be populating the library. So we have a question here from, I love the concept of the tragedy of the private. Would love to understand the general dynamics of that in contrast to the tragedy of the commons. So you kind of spoke about it. I guess you want to expand on it. Is a key tragedy the lack of use of own goods? And I think, yeah, you kind of spoke. And I suppose that includes capital itself, right? The hoarding of capital, or the accumulation of capital without any benefit for anyone, right? At its basis level, the tragedy of the private. So I guess the question here is, can you expand a little bit more on the tragedy of the private? Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
The tragedy of the private, a lot of resources are being used for manufacturing things that are, because somebody owns them, they is denying to others the opportunity to use them and to enjoy them, and because we've created that economy that is based on growth and growth and growth, so it's taking us to this logic in which all the conversations are around growth. We have to grow, otherwise it's going to be misery. So then we just keep on manufacturing things, and doesn't matter if those things are not used. We are not evaluating to what extent those things are being used. We don't consider who is buying them. Are those who are buying them really using them? This creates a very inefficient system. So we are creating efficiency for manufacturing a cheaper price, but we are not creating efficiency that can bring us the well-being that we require, which is not about manufacturing at a cheaper price, but it's about having all of us having what we need, having a certain degree of contentment, and being able to thrive and realize our dreams. So it doesn't solve this problem. It doesn't solve for the ones who have nothing. It doesn't solve for the ones that have everything, because I've seen misery everywhere, and I've seen a lot of misery among those ones that have a lot, because having a lot as well creates a sort of unbalance that really makes people miserable in a way. So it's just a matter of saying, well, let's avoid that tragedy. Let's start by making sure that if we manufacture something, we're going to use it in an optimal level. We're not going to maximize production so that we can grow. We're going to optimize usage.
And you know, Sue was talking about, I suppose that includes capital itself. And you know, I'm on the board of one of the foundations, Royal Botanic Garden Foundation, and we're really talking about impact investing, right? Because traditionally the view of wealth was wealth is there to accumulate more wealth, but that should not be its only role. It should also be, well, it's yeah, you may want to accumulate financial capital, but it should also, whilst it's being invested, it should also create social capital, and it should create environmental capital. That's the role of capital, to create all kinds of capital, not just more wealth, right? So, and that is really one of the tragedies of the private, is that people, there's that view that wealth's only role is to accumulate more wealth, right? And that shouldn't be it. Yeah.
And the biggest tragedy, one second, because I think this is really important, and a lot of what it happens today is based on that logic. It's on the belief, and it's just a belief, that 1 unit of natural capital can turn into 1 unit of financial capital. And this is not true. I can destroy a forest and turn it into a pulp for paper,
Mm-hmm.
and that paper I'm going to sell it for $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not true that I have removed $1 million of natural capital and I have turned it into $1 million of product which I'm selling, and then I'm turning it into $1 million of financial capital. The selling of the product, the manufactured capital, and turning it into financial capital is one-to-one. But the other thing, it hasn't been one-to-one. It's been a destruction of an amazing amount of natural capital in order to create a small unit of financial capital. We live in the middle of the bush here in W3. We can see, we've been experiencing the fires, and we can see that this destruction is taking place, and this is as well what is kind of triggering those fires in a way. So that's well.
And it really brings, the view of the triple bottom line. It's interesting, the investment community. I've always asked, well, how is my investment performing from a natural capital standpoint and a social capital standpoint? If I've invested $1, can you tell me what kind of social capital it's built? Because I want to impact invest. I want to be an impact investor. And what kind of natural capital it's built, right? If we had that, then we may see more investment in the recycling economy, in the reuse economy, and so on, because it'd be a balanced scorecard as opposed to just what is the financial capital created.
But maybe what we are lacking in that sense is proper indicators, because to express the correspondence in between one level and the other, because that's really, we need to update on those ones. The indicators that are used to measure the loss of natural capital or social capital, human resources, then they are not really expressing it in the right way. And that's why we are not going in the right direction. So hopefully in the future we have more, as well, the academic institutions involved in this kind of research and trying to express other indicators, come up with other indicators more.
And another thing, Ian, sorry to interrupt, but very important. When we only have one type of capital, let's say we only consider financial capital, then the logic is maximize. Let's maximize financial capital. Let's maximize profit.
Yeah.
But nature doesn't maximize. There's nothing in nature that is maximized. What nature does is optimize, which means a good enough level of everything. This means let's optimize. Let's optimize financial capital. Of course, we're not going to deny it's there. We have to optimize it. Let's optimize natural capital. Let's optimize all the different capitals so that we can create balance, because balance is brought through optimization. Maximization or minimization is going to create unbalance by definition.
And that's really in the Bubusi model. I guess that's part of the traceability functionality that you have. It allows you to gain a view of how the system is working, the model is working from a optimization and balance of optimization across all those factors. Right. I have another question here from Helen. She's asking, she's fascinated by the idea of cooperatives, and she's asking, where does cooperatives sit with ownership and custodianship? So I guess the kind of talk about the model of the cooperatives within the Bubusi system, ecosystem.
Well, in that sense, what we have done so far in that regard, it's the foundation will be the centripetal force, channeling all the resources and sending them to the cooperatives, and the cooperatives will receive the funding that they need to help improve the software. Let's say there is another implementation and we need this extra functionality, so they are able to do that and implement it in a local level. And our aim is that they are autonomous in that sense, so they have the right to distribute whatever resources they receive according to their own models. We are not expecting to create a model for each cooperative, but rather that each cooperative can be run by their own principles and decide how they want to distribute the resources they receive. Yeah.
And another important thing here is that what Alejandro said about the foundation being the centripetal force, because a foundation essentially is governed by the foundational members. So there can be a few. So in a way, it is governed by the capital. Those who put the money take the decisions. So, and that creates centripetal force. That's good. We are not saying, I mean, we are aiming at creating a foundation, and we are aiming at taking those part of those decisions, and we are aiming to that foundation have the IP and have ownership on certain things. But then we have a cooperative, which is like an association, but for trading activity, let's say. A cooperative is ruled by the members, and each member has a vote. This creates centrifugal force, because each member has a vote regardless of whether they've contributed this amount or this other amount, or with this amount of work and this other amount. So it creates that other kind of force. Yeah. So we are creating a system that has both of them, because we are acknowledging that we need both of them. What we don't want in the centripetal force is that profit maximization, because this creates a kind of a power, like a kind of a gravitational pull that it will just absorb everything. We're just saying, no, let's go to optimize the different capitals, let's say.
So the idea as well is that each cooperative will design and follow their own probably models, and yeah, they will be adopting some of the concepts. So in that way, they are linked to the foundation, but they have the right to make certain decisions, of course, on their own. That's the purpose. And then each cooperative can learn from the others, the way that the others do things. So we are already organizing things in a way that diversity is there, and it allows us for this learning process of, well, how are people doing things there? And is it working there? Should we adopt this or that? And having the opportunity to work in international groups, let's say for one implementation, then we can call people from Argentina, from Australia, and then the person guiding the group will be, or coordinating that, will decide which model they want to follow. Yeah. And the others have the opportunity to learn and then take it to their own local environment.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and then that kind of plays back into this whole concept of, we're talking about centralization versus a distributed nature. So if you have a diverse group that's distributed, then what you have is the opportunity to be more resilient, because you haven't centralized and over-optimized in one fashion, right? So it's really kind of designing that way. We'll take one last question. It's one from Sunil, and he said one of the challenges, one of the problems with product as a service is the high capital requirement to produce the good in the first place, and owner has to be willing to share their goods. A library model might work well for a charitable organization who have donated items, who have a donated item, or who have donated items that they currently sell to finance their operations. Wouldn't a rental or sharing model give them greater revenue?
Well, it's a rental model.
Yeah.
The only thing is that, I mean, we are aiming out for things not to be landed like a book. I mean, a council can create a library of things and lend things for no cost. Yeah. But the basic idea is there should be reciprocity. So the Bubusi model is all about reciprocity. Mm-hmm. If I'm going to offer something for others to use it, I need to get something back. Either I need to get the opportunity to use other things when I need them, or I need to receive an equivalent amount of money for the depreciation of that item for the time that this other person had it. Yeah. There has to be an exchange, and then as well there has to be an ecosystem and infrastructure for the repairs, for the maintenance, etc. So we are trying to build that ecosystem.
Well, that's the ideal. I mean, that being said, that's the ideal, that there's always reciprocity. But then, how the reciprocity is going to express, whether it's through a price or if the local community or the organization involved would like to have a token system, or also have a section or offer some things for free, well, that's also part of the diversity we aim at creating. So we are we're offering the tool, and the tool, the assistant, we are able to walk along the organizations to help them implement the tool, and the tool will help them and facilitate their management of the things. But then how they want to do the sharing or renting or whatever, that's beyond what we can decide. We can only hope for the best, but each organization and community, they have their own local traditions, and we really trust them. That's another very important thing in our concepts. We trust that communities and groups and organizations, they know there's an instinct, or they have been doing things in a certain way. They know their community, they know their users. So we also want to respect that, and to respect that as much as possible. And in a way, there will be different models as well within the adopters of the software, and different communities and organizations can learn from others. Well, they are doing the token thing, and it's really proving beneficial, so we would like to adopt it. Yeah. So it's similar to the cooperative things. Diversity, possibility to make own decisions, like more autonomy, self-governing in that sense, and then the possibility to share experiences and learn from what others are doing.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess it's really the key thing here, and we've spoken about it before, is really to enable that diversity. So to allow the system be configured, whether it's a hybrid model of token and money, or it's a council is funding this, right, through grants. It's just allowing all of those to have a platform that enables all those models, right? And if there's a completely new way of having that value exchange, then to be able, one of the cooperatives to be able to embed it within the platform, and then for anyone else to leverage that if they wanted to, right? So that's really yeah. So thanks. We're almost up on time. Well, we're actually 2 minutes over. We have lots of great questions. One of my colleagues is saying, so many great questions. Let's inform the audience that we'll continue the conversation on Twitter. So we have quite a few questions here. We're banking all of them, and what we'll do is we'll send it back and forth to Alejandra and Mark, but and we'll continue the conversation on social media. I'd like to thank both of you so much from beautiful W3 and East Gippsland for joining us. And I hope everyone had a great session. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
It was a pleasure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.